Welcome back. Daw KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster. Hello, Chris.
Afternoon, Ian.
How are you?
I'm in good shape, you know. I mean, we've got such a massive story in the departure of Nicola Sturgeon. I mean, I bet everyone's just out there talking about nothing else.
Yes, every conversation in the pub, everybody at home is talking about what happened with Nicola. I wonder whether, and it depends on where you sit politically, because we've had different guests on today who've had different defences of her position. I don't think the trans prisoner row was it on its own, but I think it contributed to a narrative of, you know, this is all she's going to be asked about now. And it's worth, as you are a lawyer, asking your thoughts on that point in terms of the legalities of all of that. If somebody, and I'm not quite sure when this person decided they were a woman, but it seems that it came to prominence during the court case, whereas I understand it, this person was originally being addressed as a male in the court and then subsequently as a female. And that for many people was, you know, a kind of a move too far in some respects. Hang on a second, really? What, as you're about to go to jail, you suddenly become a woman? I'm sure it goes back before that, but certainly there was something in that. What's the deal with...
Ian, has this got anything to do with Nicola Sturgeon, or I've completely lost track of what you're talking?
Because she was the person in charge, of course.
OK, yes, fine. It's just a very convoluted and complex story.
Well, it certainly is a complex
Is it possibly
story,
as simple as the fact that she's just had enough?
Well, it could be that.
She wants to go, no? I mean, we had the same thing in the Prime Minister, I think, of New Zealand recently, just decided that she
ran out of fuel.
She just said, I've had enough. And I think there's huge respect to be had for politicians that eventually, after years and years in the top job, just say, do you know what, let someone else have a go. You know, let not cling on to power at all costs.
But I think Sturgeon spoke in riddles. I think she spoke in a lot of riddles in what she does. She said, it's not really this and it's not really that, and I've thought about it, and then... You think, hang on a second, like you're the person that wants your name on the tin of independence, and yet, you know, as you move in what you believe is a positive direction, they got a bit of a kick in that judicial review that looked at their right to call a referendum without consulting Westminster, but surely, like, she would want to finish the job.
Well, she does want to finish the job, but the truth is that the Scottish people don't want the job done, and we know that from the previous referendum, and we know from all of the opinion polls that I think the Scottish public are strongly, a strong majority is just saying independence isn't going to happen, and actually the Scottish economy and Scottish society and social issues and health and all of these things are more important than just becoming a one-trick pony, which is what she wanted the SNP to be in the next election. She said it's going to be a referendum on independence. Well, it's not. It can't be, because the Supreme Court said that only the Westminster Parliament can hold a legal and binding referendum. So, frankly, in the end, I think she just run out of ideas, and the single most important policy that she wished to pursue has just become unrealistic in Scotland. And you know, I suspect most Scottish people would rather focus on, as I say, health and the economy and jobs and education and all the other things, rather than just this constant refrain about independence.
My point of raising the gender thing was just to check out the legality or what the situation is with things like prisons and courtrooms when it comes to a prisoner. So ordinarily, if this was not a rape case, this person would have been sent to a woman's prison.
Well, I think the answer is that ordinarily anyone is sent to a prison that matches their sort of birth gender, and only very rarely are people sent to prisons which reflect a gender that they have chosen or adopted later in life. So your point about people choosing to change gender sort of almost in the middle of a case or apparently for strategic reasons, I think is a good one. We spoke about this last time I was on, in fact, and my view is that, you know, trans prisoners need trans wings, and then the whole issue of protecting women, and which is fundamentally, for me, the most important issue of all, is that women prisoners are not abused by anyone, whether they are trans or otherwise.
Which would happen if you just put a trans woman into a male prison, then there's going to be trouble, right?
Well, there's going to be a risk, potentially. Not for all trans women, of course, because the great majority of trans women don't pose a risk to anyone of anything.
No, I mean, there's going to be...
But certainly for someone who has a history...
No, I mean, if you put a trans woman in a male prison, there's going to be problems for the trans woman.
Exactly. There's going to be a problem for a trans woman in a male prison. There's going to be a problem for women prisoners in a women's prison. if a convicted rapist is amongst them. And so the truth of it is we just have to consider trans wings as the only sort of fair and sensible alternative, it seems to me.
Let's talk as sensitively as we can for obvious reasons, Chris. I don't really need to tell you that. But I'm intrigued by the issue of what constitutes a hate crime. There is a terrible story of a young trans girl who's lost her life. Brianna Gay was stabbed, and the police have made arrests, so we know that stops that bit of the conversation. But initially they talked about, we're not treating this as a hate crime, and then they said we might treat this as a hate crime. How do they constitute a hate crime? How do they know whether it's a hate crime? If you punch somebody who's a different ethnicity or a different sexuality, then you might punch them anyway, regardless of that.
Yeah, the court decides that issue as part of the legal process. So if someone is accused of a crime which involves a hate element, so in other words, if someone commits a racially motivated crime or a crime that's motivated on the basis of some other protected legal characteristic, it's for the court to decide whether it was a hate crime, whether it was racially or otherwise motivated by some characteristic of that kind. And ultimately, if someone is charged with a crime where there's an element where that's part of the crime, the jury decides whether that's the case. If it's not part of the crime, and murder, of course, is a crime that doesn't respect any particular gender or otherwise, it's the same crime regardless of who's killed. In the end, only a judge will decide at the time of any sentence, if someone's convicted, whether or not the judge believes that there was a hate motivation. And if there was, the sentence is higher. The sentence is increased for a crime that's motivated by hate and prejudice.
But that's the bit that I find interesting. Surely the crime is already motivated by hate. If you smack somebody in the chops, then that's fairly hateful. If you, at the same time, shout out, you white Christian piece of whatever, then that would accelerate or increase your sentence. It
would increase your sentence, and in some cases there are specific crimes where racial motivation is a different and more serious crime. So racially aggravated assault, for example, is a more serious crime than assault which is not racially motivated. And the reason for that, I think, is a very sensible one, which is that hate crimes, when they're committed, can often lead to other hate crimes. And once you have groups being victimised for their race, and the most obvious example being the Jewish people in Germany 100 years or so ago, once a group is victimised, unfortunately, that can spread like wildfire in a society, and it can lead to completely random hate crimes being committed against people. So the thinking is that if you identify hate crime as a special and particularly serious form of crime, it's supposed to act as a broader deterrent. When people hear in the news that someone's been convicted of a hate crime, it's supposed to make people stop and think.
So would that be, if you were sentenced to a year, would you then get 2 years, or would
potentially
it be,
yes, exactly. Kind of so the same act, in other words, it really, as you've just described, someone who physically assaulted someone and uses a racial abuse that makes clear that they're doing so because someone is white or black or whatever, they will receive a tougher sentence than if that hate element didn't exist.
Let's look at this most recent story, then, this ongoing story of Nicola Bulley, and these extraordinary press conferences. The third one today, it was a different police officer giving the conference. And I understand it, and I think she sort of made the point, look, everyone is an armchair detective. People think they know what's going, why haven't you searched this? We have. Why didn't you look at that? We have. Why didn't you have the forensic? We have. She was trying to address, really, a lot of almost public hysteria around this, and mischief as well.
Yes, and I don't think it's the police's role to do that. I think it's a big mistake when police officers, investigators, in particular those who are hands-on dealing with an investigation, are spending their time explaining to the media and the public what they're doing. It's not what the police are there for. There should be press officers who can give sort of limited and very clear information, which should be in the public domain, but I don't think investigators in the middle of an investigation should be giving a running commentary on the case. There's a whole different issue around all of the people out there who are not police officers or even professional journalists who are putting out potentially misleading content about a case. And unfortunately, in the social media age, we can't stop that. But I think the police have to be very responsible and have to essentially take the stance, we're only going to make public statements if it's in the interest of the investigation and it's going to help.
But isn't that part of it? Aren't they also trying to by having the press conference, it keeps the profile up, and if anybody is, there was still obviously mentioned within it that, if people know anything, saw saw anything, remember anything, misremembered something, you must come forward, etc.
Yes, I think the danger is that because we've had these sort of ups and downs of different case theories and different sort of explanations as to what may have happened, is that ultimately there is no consistent line coming out from even from the police. And the danger there is that you just encourage yet more speculation through the media, and in particular through social media, when actually what the police should be doing is focusing on the sort of old-fashioned kind of techniques, such as, you know, searching and checking CCTV and using sort of any techniques that exist to kind of trace a missing person, of course divers and such like, where there's water involved, rather than kind of constantly updating the public. I think this has just been blown up, this story, from what is undoubtedly a form of tragedy of some kind, into something which has become a media and a social media kind of storm, and I don't think the police are necessarily helping that.
Chris, thank you. We'll talk more to Chris Daw KC in a few moments' time on Talk TV. It's 3:20 on Talk TV. Chris Daw KC, broadcaster. In fact, I should say barrister before I say broadcaster.
Yeah, you definitely should, because that's my actual job.
That's your actual job.
Yeah, I mean, coming in here
the
talking
big
to you.
bucks for that.
Well, yeah. Unless there's something I don't know about the fee that I'm getting for today.
Have we got food or anything we can give?
We've got nothing.
We've got nothing.
Tell you what, though, Darcy, who works for you, is excellent at making cups of tea.
Do you think so?
It's one of the best.
Disagree with you more.
Well, yeah, that's because you don't specify the strength and the milk content with enough clarity. So look at the colour of mine. That's the perfect colour for a cup of tea.
Yeah, look at yours is a bit darker than mine, but there
it should be.
There you go. Cups of tea courtesy of Darcy's Tea Emporium.
It's the best cup of tea I've had since I feel terrible, because I've been brought cups of tea here before which was so milky as to be undrinkable.
Oh, the milky tea. That's
milky
a filthy business, isn't it?
Everyone out there is listening to this or watching this thinking, he's right. He's right about the milky tea.
Never give a barrister milky tea. A barrister's like a builder in that respect.
Of course,
you need to, you're
building arguments instead of buildings.
Correct. Yeah. There you go. You need to stand a spoon up in that thing.
Absolutely. But no sugar, though. Don't put sugar in tea.
Don't put sugar in the tea. Unless you're hungover, then it's...
No, never put sugar in tea.
Do you know what I did last Saturday? I know this is like not the best anecdote in the world, but I was looking for... I hadn't been to literally a greasy spoon for a long time. I've made my own fry-ups at home.
Of course.
But actually go into a cafe and just say, full English, please. And
or a number 12. I like it when you go in and they have
they've got the little
photos
choice.
and they have numbers in the corner.
That's it.
And you just want a number 12.
I had the whole kit and caboodle.
Do you want extra bacon,
but all of the extra sausage, fried slice, everything.
Are you a fried slice man, Ian?
I love a fried slice. I know it's a very
never enough, though.
Bad thing for your heart. Fried slice with put your egg on the fried slice. That's the advice.
You see, I like the fried slice to be crispy. And I like to use it to mop up my beans and my egg yolk.
Yeah,
if you put the egg on the top, it will soften the fried slice too much.
So the first cut of a fry-up, I love this conversation, is a bit of bacon, a bit of fried slice, dipped into the yolk of the egg, which already has some ketchup on it.
But you have been... No, ketchup? Are you crazy?
What are you talking about?
Brown sauce. So you put ketchup on a fried breakfast?
Brown sauce on a...
Are you insane?
No, you put brown sauce in a bacon sandwich.
Oh, my God, obviously, but you don't...
Chris, can you leave, please?
No, ketchup goes on burgers.
Judge!
Ketchup is used for dipping fries, but you don't put ketchup on an English breakfast. That's outrageous.
Why do they have tubes of ketchup next to the thing in the little pot?
For later in the day when people are ordering chips and stuff like that, not for the fried breakfast.
Not the Savoy.
Well, why do they have the brown sauce following your logic?
It's Frank's greasy spoon I'm going into.
Yeah, but
He's got the
brown
ketchup
sauce
by the gallon load.
They have more brown sauce than ketchup.
It's got skip loads of the stuff out the back.
This is nonsense.
Chris, these are the legal arguments of the day, you see. Yeah. What constitutes... There's got to be a precedent there, isn't there? Daw versus Collins, where they famously established that only ketchup is the way forward for a full English.
If you brought me a full English with ketchup, I'd just send it back.
Would you really?
I would. Especially if you sprinkled it over the top. What do you create a little puddle of ketchup to dip in, or do you put it over the top of it?
I disproportionately go over the egg, and then I have a little puddle.
Oh, my God, ketchup on egg, that's ridiculous.
Oh, stop it. What are you talking about?
Actually, to be fair, an egg sandwich... I would... So what if I'm having
It's coming round now.
No,
coming round.
If I had 2 egg sandwiches... So I'm not putting it on a fried breakfast. We're moving on.
That's never going to happen.
Because my blood pressure is so high as a result of you talking about ketchup in that way. But if I have 2 fried egg sandwiches, obviously on white bread... I might do one with brown sauce and one with ketchup, and then I'll stack them and then put a sharp knife through the middle. So you actually kind of a little bit of a blend in the middle, a bit of ketchup, a bit of brown sauce, a bit of egg yolk.
You're going brown-red combo?
Only in that very, very specific circumstance.
This is a very specific circumstance, one I don't even want to dwell on, frankly.
No, but we spend our lives as lawyers thinking about the detail. That's the difference here. All you have to do is come on here and just tell your little stories and go home.
Yeah. My mate Richard just sent me a text, by the way. He says, I got round the issue of round bread and brown sauce by putting both on the plate. So, you see, he's done a similar thing to you.
It's a cop-out. He's a cop-out. And I'm not surprised he's a friend of yours with that attitude.
He doesn't care what he eats, Richard.
Doesn't care.
There you go.
Probably just drinks ketchup out the bottle.
Let's move to this story. We were talking about social media, weren't we? And the curious nature of it. It's unstoppable. I was looking, and it kind of disappoints me as well, because even journalists, I mean, literally people who've got in their bio, I'm a journalist, and I think, well, you could stop a court case with what you've just written there. In theory, legally you could, because if somebody wanted to argue that what you've written there, subjudice and all these different elements of the law, it's extraordinary. And I can get that, and I don't mean this in a patronising way, lots of people on social media don't realise that they are subject to the same laws as the person that publishes the Daily Telegraph.
No, they don't, and it's really, really straightforward. The Contempt of Court Act isn't complicated. If you do something that causes a substantial risk of prejudice to a criminal case, that's a criminal offence for which you could be sent to prison, and it doesn't matter whether you do it on talk radio, on the BBC, or via your phone sitting in a cafe eating an appropriately sourced fry-up. And
I've even, on occasions, there were a couple of very high-profile cases where people have written their suggestions of what had actually happened. There was a case as well, in fact, Baby P was the best case, where the people were not named. And, of course, there was a good reason they weren't there, because there was a subsequent court case, etc. That would never have been a fair trial if they were named. And some people got it into their heads that they weren't being named to protect them in some kind of nice way. And I remember taking calls from people who were trying to get the names out on air. And then there was a Facebook group set up. A Facebook group was set up to name the people. And I politely sent an email to the moderator of the Facebook group, said, look, with respect, I'm sure you mean no harm. I'm sure you're doing this because you think it's the right thing to do. But actually, this could collapse a case.
Well, it could collapse a case, and equally, there are two different issues here, because I was talking about the general rule in relation to contempt of court, but in many cases, and that, I'm sure, is one of them, you have a judge making a specific order, a court order, saying you must not name these people, they must not be named for entirely sensible legal reasons. Someone who breaks that order could well find themselves in prison.
Yeah. And when I said, the response I got back was, I don't care. And I thought, well, hang on. There's another victim in this.
Exactly.
Where the case is yet to happen.
Well, justice is the victim. When a case falls apart because some idiot goes on social media and deliberately breaks a court order or commits a contempt of court, the highest price of all is paid by the system of justice and by the victims of the crime. So people just need to think a bit more carefully about it. But listen, if someone's got that attitude, then hopefully they'll get a visit from the police and they'll spend a bit of time in jail reflecting on whether it's such a good idea or not.
But you know what? You think by now everybody would know this, but in the same way there are still some people who don't know about the Nigerian prince email scam. There are still people who don't realise. You know, I've spoken to people on this subject and they'll say, social media is where you can say anything. That's the whole point. Anything you like. You can swear, you can be offensive, you can say anything. And they've yet to get their head around the idea that there are...
I'm shocked by that. But I'm shocked that there are people that think that somehow the law is suspended because you're on Twitter.
Yes,
I mean, it's just such an idiotic position to take. The crimes can be committed in exactly the same way using social media as they can be shouting at someone in a pub or any other way. So if you interfere with the course of justice, expect to be arrested and expect in the end to pay a heavy price for that. Because I can tell you, when judges are faced with cases where that happens, they come down on people like a ton of bricks, particularly when it's deliberate.
Yeah. Here's a case involving social media. A drug dealer who taunted police on social media while he was on the run has been jailed for 2 years. Joshua Bennett complained on Facebook about a picture of him used in a police appeal. He claimed that he was an inch taller than described and published pictures of himself enjoying his freedom. He was apprehended after being spotted by officers in Gloucestershire and was sentenced for supplying cannabis and cocaine. I don't know whether he got anything accelerated on that or increased because of his cajoling on social media.
I don't know. I haven't read the details of how the sentence was reached, but
I remember the case now.
I know, but you have to say that it tells you a lot about the average intellectual caliber of low-level drug dealers. I've been doing drugs cases for almost 30 years, or around 30 years, and I am always amazed and amused at how drug dealers find different ways to get themselves caught and get themselves into more trouble than they would have been if they just kept their mouths shut.
Is it specific to that crime, do you think? I think so. Is there a sort of bragging rights? I
think probably it is, and I think the answer is because drug dealing is an interesting thing because people do it. And if they have even a slight amount of success, they'll suddenly find they've got quite a few quid in their pocket, and they suddenly think that they're very clever, so they can do whatever they like. And unfortunately, within a short period of time, that usually unravels for them.
And also, I suppose over the years, there's been lots of big drug barons that have been romanticised through film and books and the like, even though they shouldn't be, but they kind of are.
That's true.
You watch The Sopranos and things like that, and for some reason you find yourself liking Tony Soprano. You think, why do I like this guy? Breaking Bad would be a great example.
That's true, but don't forget, nearly every one of those famous cases, whether they be fictional or whether they be, from real life, they normally always end up with the drug dealer in prison or dead. So whatever the kind of, the humour and the romance that might surround it in some ways, I'm not giving away the whole of The Sopranos, but I don't think it was a very happy ending for Tony. And sorry if anyone's halfway through the box set, by the way.
Yeah, it is like 20 years old now, so if you just started it,
it's not a spoiler at this point, is it?
Exactly. And this story is one which is going to disturb many people. A convicted murderer who was subject to the UK's first public parole hearing has been released from prison. The Ministry of Justice have recently confirmed this. Russell Causley murdered his wife, Carol Packham, in Bournemouth in 1985. But what makes this story curious is that he's never revealed the whereabouts of her body. The parole board confirmed the 79-year-old would be freed after he argued his case at a hearing in December. He'd been an inmate at a prison in Lewes. I always thought that not revealing that point would be the reason that you wouldn't get through the parole board.
No,
apparently not.
No, it isn't. It has long been a policy of parole boards that they don't release people who maintain their innocence because of the risk that person has no insight and therefore they still remain a risk to the public. But when it comes to the revelation of the location of a body, there was talk, you may remember, over the last year or so about bringing in a specific parole regulation that would not allow release for someone who didn't declare where a body was. For various reasons, that hasn't come to pass, and he's been released after, as you pointed out, a very long time in prison,
nearly 40
much
years.
Longer than the average for murder of any kind, which is these days more like 20 years. So he's been in prison for a very, very long time. I think, for me, there is the real problem with saying someone has to remain in prison unless they reveal some information. I just don't see that that's a proper use of the parole system, which is supposed to be about risk to the public, not about extracting information out.
But isn't there just a basic point of justice there, that if you can't reveal where... I mean, I would argue, Chris, that I know we have differing views on prisons and their application in criminality, but wouldn't this be a great example of where it would kind of work? It's only right that you reveal where the victim is, because that's closure for... Well, firstly, it's right and proper by any measure, but also other family members, there might be kids involved who would need to know this, so they can... That would be the right thing to do. And until you tell us, you're not coming out of jail.
No, I don't agree with you. I think there's a number of reasons that surround that, but not least the fact that not everybody who kills can remember where the body was. Some bodies are disposed of.
Who can't remember where they disposed of a body?
People who have consumed an awful lot of drugs, or people who are suffering from very severe psychosis or other mental illness, may have no recollection of committing the crime at all. And that's the reality of a certain percentage of murder cases. And a certain percentage of murder cases, the body is destroyed for good. It's burnt, or it goes in the sea, or something like that. So I think it's far too complex to simply say that unless you are, not all bodies are lying neatly sort of in a grave somewhere by a particular marker where they're easily found after 20 or 30 or 40 years. Tragically, many of them are just not available to be recovered. So it's a difficult case, and I just think that ultimately the parole board's job is not to force people to declare things, but to decide whether they remain a risk to the public. And that once you divert the parole system from dealing with risk then I'm afraid it becomes a political football, and that's where it all starts to go wrong.
Doesn't believe in prisons, puts brown sauce on a fry-up. This is what we're dealing with in our judicial system, Chris.
Yes, well, and exactly, but
Did they teach you nothing at law school?
Well, they did, and you know what? Talking about it, so round the corner from law school, which was just off Bedford Row and in Holborn, there was the best greasy spoon ever. And I don't think they even had ketchup in there in the mornings. I think they only.
Of course they did.
No, they didn't. I think they brought the ketchup out at around 12 o'clock when they started doing lunch.
Well, is Bob the ketchup monitor come in, so he'd go round and dispense it on the
Next,
table.
you'll be telling me you put the ketchup in the fridge, and then I'll just walk out of your studio.
Okay, chips, all right?
Yeah.
Anyone who dips their chips in brown sauce is a wrong 'un, right?
See, it's very interesting to me.
Here we go.
So I've thought about this. So in the last 4 or 5 minutes, some people have chips on their fried breakfast. Now,
oh, no, that's a terrible thing.
Okay, but it happens, right?
It does. You go in there. On Saturday morning.
Look at all the photos, and several of the numbered photos of breakfast will have chips.
We'll have chips on them. Yeah.
Now, I don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that.
But
that should be against...
if you've got chips on your fried breakfast, then given that my golden rule is that you have to have ketchup, so you have to have brown sauce on a fried breakfast, I think you'd have to accept that the chips and the brown sauce would come into contact.
So there's a caveat there, and it involves
I think it's an exception that proves the rule.
Mayonnaise?
Oh, no! Ian! No.
Skinny chips dipped in mayonnaise and in ketchup.
No, you can't mix them together. You've got Mary Rose sauce then.
You can't do the simultaneous combo?
You put Mary Rose on a chip. That's for dipping prawns at your prawn sandwich parties.
Obviously, I have all of those.
Your media parties that you're at all the time.
Just a word while you're with us, Chris. Final word. Televised court cases. We've talked about this before. What we're seeing is televised sentencing. As we've discovered, as a broadcaster, these things can go on for a long old time. I remember, sitting there as a reporter in courtrooms,
it's
thinking,
like a Nicholas Sturgeon resignation suite.
It's the sentencing. This should take about 3 minutes, and you think, oh no, this is like an hour long, and then some. On occasions, I'm sure you've sat through many that were even longer. There's lots of
sometimes for days if there's 10 defendants.
Of course, and lots of legal clarifications and reasonings and all the rest of it. We've seen a few of these, so you only see the judge, and curiously, we seem to have seen the same judge. She seems to have appeared on everything.
Yes, Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb. Yes, she's been...
Have you ever worked in front of her?
I have been in front of her on a couple of occasions. I think once in the Court of Appeal a couple of years ago, yes. She's one of the most high-profile and respected judges.
My rule of thumb now, if you get done for anything, you walk in and she's the judge. That's it, game over, frankly.
Well, no, not necessarily.
She's sending you down for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, but that's only because the cases that
I know that we've seen recently.
She's not sentencing shoplifters at Walthamstow Magistrate Court.
Exactly, yes. You will get 45 years.
£45 fine.
No time off.
Double yellow line.
But you've said, and I tend to agree with this, and I watched a clip yesterday of a judge in the States sentencing a sex offender. It was a very grim case involving a kid's nursery. I don't need to give any more details. To 20 years, and she kind of went a bit off-piste in this summing up, and maybe this is... I'm sure a judge can say whatever the heck they want when they're there, but she went off-piste in the sense, she said, I'm just fed up of seeing people like you, she says to me, in this courtroom, the lives you ruin, the idea that you have no concept, how can a grown... And it was very surprising to watch, because you don't tend to see that, and particularly in this country where we have a very... almost very, very kind of sensible protocol and language around legal arguments, etc. To see a judge drift away from that and almost say, no, I'm going to dispense with what I'd written last night for this summing up, and I'm just going to tell it like it is.
No, that does happen, and it happens in this country. It's highly unlikely to happen in one of the tiny number of televised sentences that we've seen recently, because they've been in the most high-profile and incredibly sensitive cases of really gruesome kind of murder and sexual offending. So there's not really much room for that, I think, in that kind of case. But the truth is, if you were to go into any courtroom up and down the land and you were to sit and listen to judges sentencing, I think people will be surprised at how much common sense and how much kind of, really quite emotive language is and can be used and can properly be used as part of the sentencing process, provided the judge doesn't depart from the relevant sentencing guidelines and the law. That's the fundamental issue. How they explain themselves to a defendant and the public when they pass sentence is very individual. And you see it more reported in the newspapers, but you'll see judges often making the most, really quite severe comments about a defendant and their behaviour in exactly the kind of language you've described, which is one of the reasons I think every courtroom in the country should have a camera feed to the internet, and you should be able to watch all of it. And I think
apart from the jury, of course.
Not the jury, of course, and not witnesses who need to be protected for one reason or another, but the rest of the process.
You certainly want to see the defendant
opened up. Exactly. So when someone's sentenced, there's been a big controversy recently about people refusing to come into the court to be sentenced, and that we should be able to see them. Well, if that's the case, you should be able to see them looking at it on your phone or in your house on television as well. Why not? Why can't we see everything that happens?
I agree. Do you remember the case where the defendant called the judge a four-lettered word and she called him the same one back?
Yes, I do remember that. And that kind of thing...
Did she get in trouble for that?
Did the judge get in trouble for that? I don't recall.
Because I think it happened 3 or 4 times. He called her again, and she called him.
I think she may have got a minor reprimand. I don't think it was anything too serious.
Very funny to read the transcript, I have to say.
Yes, well, lots of transcripts in court are quite amusing, but there's nothing more awkward than reading your own.
Chris, I'll let you go off and have a nice frap with your brown sauce.
Not at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. God, it's ridiculous.
Good to see you, Chris. We'll speak soon. Daw KC with us here on Talk TV.